It's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat. This series is our Chief Medical Officer series. It's kindly been partnered with Royal Canin. Brent's on the podcast with us, and our guest today, very excited to have Molly McAllister on, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Mars Veterinary Health. I remember we were chatting on your birthday on LinkedIn, and I was walking along the beach near Amarg. I'm sure you had a great birthday, but it's great. As we said, we were looking forward to meeting face to face. So slowly but surely, we're moving in the right direction. We've got a virtual face to face, Molly. So thank you so much for coming
closer
on.
And closer. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony and Brent. I'm really happy to be here.
I wanted just to start, Molly, just tell us a little bit about, your history. We know you're the Chief Medical Officer of Mars Veterinary Health. Perhaps tell us a little bit about that. But how did you, come to this role? A little bit of the history of where you qualified from and bits like that, so people get to know you.
Absolutely. Well, I did not start out my career path wanting to be a veterinarian. I knew I was very interested in science and animals, and that my life would take me in that direction in some way. But it wasn't until later on, after my undergraduate, my college years, that I really put all the pieces together and saw that my love of education, my love of people and cultures and diversity, and of course, my love of animals, that they really all came together in this great profession of veterinary medicine. So I went to veterinary school at Oregon State University, which at the time was the smallest veterinary school in the United States. Had a fantastic time there. One of the advantages was with 33 students in my class, I got to get really close and have some wonderful advice and interactions with our professors there. Because of various experiences, I went to veterinary school without a lot of clinical background. I had spent some time working for an equine veterinarian before I applied, but my education had been more in the conservation, the wildlife, the field biology space. And so it was kind of a benefit that I went through school not quite knowing what I would do with my education. And so I really embraced the breadth of what we get to and have to learn as part of our education. And as I came out of school, I got some great advice from various mentors who said, the best thing you can do is just go into clinical practice for a few years, because it's like riding a bike. Once you go into clinical practice, you solidify your skills, all that investment, and then you can take that education and knowledge and go in any direction. And I wasn't sure about that advice when I got it. And that is probably the most common advice that I have repeated throughout my career, because it was 100% the right thing to do. I spent some time in equine practice. I moved to small animal medicine. And then I really started to lean into my variety of passions and the way I wanted to make an impact in the world. And so that started with a tentative step. I went from small animal medicine to start doing some wildlife rehabilitation and conservation medicine. And then I had an opportunity to step into industry and actually work with Royal Canin, with Brent, many years ago, 16 years ago. And that was this entry into Mars and into a culture that just gave me a phenomenal opportunity for development. And so I held various roles along the way. I can talk about those as we go through this podcast, but I would have never imagined being where I am. And I am so grateful and fortunate that this jungle gym of a career has really allowed me to bring my strengths and my passions to the table and find a role where I feel fulfilled every single day.
Just Brent, very quickly, I know you've said exactly the same thing to me. When you left vet school, your mentors said, go into practice. I think you'd already decided maybe practice wouldn't be the thing, but it was still the right thing to do to go in for a few years, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly the same advice, and it worked out in a very similar way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Molly, so it's funny because a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know this, but there was this really tiny little team within Royal Canin US many, many years ago that we were both on. And now, you know, look where we are today, your role, my role, and even one other person is the chief science officer of Mars Science and Diagnostics, all on that same team, our former boss. So I guess, along that line, I mean, Did you ever think you were setting out to be the chief medical officer of Mars Veterinary Health? I mean, kind of how did all of it fall into place?
Yeah, absolutely not. Declaratively not. I really thought after my years in school, while I was interested in opportunities out of clinical medicine, I always thought that it would really be about me doing some sort of a technical job, whether it was a clinician, whether it was going into research or teaching. I didn't really think about the opportunity to lead, nor did I think about the opportunity to lead at scale. And I'll say, when I graduated 20 years ago, there may have been a couple of larger clinic groups. I think VCA and Banfield were both in existence at the time, and they had chief medical officers, but it wasn't a job that that was abundant in the profession. And so my entry into Royal Canin was really a turning point for me, and that was it was about 7 or 8 years out of school. And I think for many people, that's a time where we think about, do we want to go into practice ownership? Do we want to do something? What's the next step in our career? And for me, the opportunity to go into industry was about seeing more breadth in our profession. And then I think that's really what Royal Canin and Mars delivered to me, or gave to me, was that perspective of what's possible, of what my degree can allow me to do. I had a little bit of a view of that when I went from equine practice into small animal practice. I hadn't spent a lot of time in small animal medicine in school, and so that was a big step when I realized that I was used to giving penicillin and gentamicin, and Clavamox was a foreign foreign topic, or foreign medication to me. And so it took me a few weeks to realize that my skills were transferable. I just had to step back from the details and think about how to apply them more broadly. And so then taking that step into Mars was really an amplification of that same realization, that my skills could allow me to educate other veterinarians, that my skills could allow me to actually be a good leader, to gather data and disseminate insights to the profession. So in so many ways, I had this realization that I could do more. And then it's really been, I think I would attribute it to the fantastic development opportunities and development culture within Mars, that I have not had a straight path. I didn't look forward and say, one day I want that job. I really leaned into what I was passionate about, and the organization helped me find the right next step, and continue to think about what's my next best move. How do I apply my education, my knowledge, my passion to something bigger and more impactful? And so I think really my steps have been about, how can I grow the impact that I have in our profession and in our world more broadly? And that has led me to this position, a role which actually didn't exist within Mars until about 7 or 8 years ago. So it's been a really serendipitous and fortunate path.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. I know Anthony's got some questions for you, but before he asks, I just want to say, like, this has been, as we've interviewed the different chief medical officers that we've had in this series, this has been a common theme. And I think it's so inspirational to have people like yourself and the other chief medical officers we've talked to say this, because it could be you, like anybody who's out there listening, like right now, it could be you. You may think, oh, I'm just in a practice that doesn't even sound possible. This is exactly how it happened for almost every single person we've talked to, is they've taken an opportunity which has led to the next and the next, and then and I don't want to make it seem like you didn't do your part. I mean, it wasn't serendipitous at all. It was everybody along the way. You took your opportunity and you made the most of it. But it's not some sort of thing out there that people are thinking, oh, I could never do that. You absolutely could. You absolutely could.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of it was sort of finding an open door and taking the risk of stepping through it. And to be
Mhm.
perfectly honest, I think a little bit of, fake it till you make it. Not in the sense that, I didn't know what to do, but let's just lean into this and pretend I can be successful. And lo and behold, the success follows when you start to set yourself on that path.
I think it's about having that positive mindset, isn't it? And obviously, just listening to you, you obviously are, and reading your, resume, you're a lifelong learner. You
Yes,
probably don't think
yes.
you know all the answers yet. There's more to learn as well. So education must be a really important part of your role. And I think for people to develop as well, obviously we run an education platform, but our thing is, if people are confident in what they're doing, they're going to walk into the consulting room or whatever job they do with more confidence. They're much more
Yes.
likely to kind of stay in the profession as well. So just kind of give us a bit of an idea. I get the feeling education is a really important part of your role, but what are you doing, on a day to day or week to week basis? What does that job description look like? Because there must be loads
Yeah.
of bits. There's an educational bit, there's stewardship of pharmaceuticals, obviously the leadership of just keeping that close knit team. Mars Veterinary Health, I mean, how many countries are you in? You're in a lot of countries. So that
Over.
cultural
Yeah.
difference as well.
Yeah, yeah, and just Anthony, quickly to touch on what you said about the learning, the love of learning. I think that's a really important piece, because I would say where I've gotten in my career is to recognize that I am absolutely not going to have all the answers. I'm not going to step in and know exactly what to do in most any situation. At this point in my in my career, the work I do is so complex and so broad that it's rare that I say, yes, I know what to do. What brings me success is really going back to that scientific method of asking a question, asking good questions, having a hypothesis, exploring that hypothesis, and then really it's a physical exam process. What is the history? What is the
Yeah.
signal meant? What are the tests that I need to run? What is a differential list of differential diagnoses? I mean, that is what I do in
Yeah.
nearly every situation. And so I think differentiating the way that I've built my confidence in myself. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing that I can figure a lot of things out. And I think that's been really important. And so, when I talk about what I do every day, I want to emphasize this is not that I have this superhuman capability of, knowing how to drive antimicrobial stewardship as well as medical quality, as well as human, engagement. It's about being curious and knowing how to leverage resources and bring the best answer to life. And generally it's not my answer. It's my facilitation of the environment around me. So my job, that's a great question. If you were to read my job description, it would tell you that I'm responsible. So today, Mars Veterinary Health operates in over 20 countries. We have over 3,000 veterinary hospitals, and that ranges from preventive care to general practice to specialty and emergency. We also have hospice care. So we have really a full spectrum of companion animal care. And we have about 70,000 associates, 12,000 of them are veterinarians, so delivering the care across those countries. So my job, and I want to be very clear that at that scale, my impact is very different. I'm not in each and every one of those hospitals. And so it's a lot of working through other people. But my responsibilities are to support and drive medical quality improvement through primarily systems and environment.
Hmm.
It's to drive our knowledge and science base for the advancement of the quality of care that we can provide. It's to support the development of a sustainable workforce pipeline. So, how do we support the students? And then the continual career development for our veterinary professionals. So, their continuing education, their career opportunities. And then there's certainly a component of being a business leader, putting an enterprise hat on and saying, I sit in a room with 11 other people, and there's one other veterinarian in the room, but in general, when I've sat in those rooms, I'm the one there to represent the veterinary hospital
Hmm.
and to speak the voice of the veterinary professional and make sure that in all of our business decisions that we're considering the impact that it has on our ability to deliver care, the impact it has on our people who are delivering that care, and that we're cognizant of the environment around us in the profession writ large. And that is at a global scale. So there's a lot of consideration there. So that is a huge part of how I spend my time. But then I think within that are some really important aspects. One of those is how I support my team. The folks that I manage, each of those areas that I described has a leader in charge of it. So, how do I support them, help them develop their roadmap and remove the barriers to what they're trying to get done? And it's also the opportunity to provide mentorship to people within our business. That's a really important part of the Mars culture that resonates highly, just deeply with me, which is making the time for the people around me who want some advice or want some perspective. And so I'd say I spend probably close to 10% of my time with people who aren't my direct reports. Some of those are ongoing mentorship relationships. Some of those are just career conversations, one on one, but talking to our associates from around the world about their careers, their challenges, their desires, the opportunities ahead of them, and helping them talk through those situations. And then I'd say finally there's a great opportunity in terms of engaging externally. So how do I support the profession and the communities that we work in through my engagement with different organizations, through determining areas where Mars can provide thought leadership or support. Sustainability would be one of those spaces, and how we can share some of the great things that we're doing internally with folks who aren't part of the Mars family, with this idea that we are really here to make a better world for pets, and that's not just about how Mars functions, that's about how we elevate the entire profession so we can better care for pets and the families that love them so much.
It's really good. You're both chief medical officers within that Mars group. Where do you both get your training from, and what would you say was your style of? I get the feeling that you've got very similar styles of leadership. You know each other very well. You brought up obviously with Royal Canin and the success that happened there with people going on to develop. It sounds like there is something within the culture there that encourages people to be to become lifelong learners, to want to develop, and also, and I've seen it very much when you look through people's LinkedIn resumes who are, in corporates in America and elsewhere. Often somewhere within their career path has been a time with Mars, the Mars companies, either Royal Canin or Banfield or whoever. So how did that actually happen? Obviously there's a sense, a holistic sense of how you do management. I think you do kind of, some people leadership and management have it or they don't, but obviously you can be taught as well. So how have the two of you got better at that rather than just making mistakes, which obviously often do help? But what was the kind of path that you took educationally to become so good at it?
Brent, do you want to start? You precede me in the organization by several years. So do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, having known Molly for a long time, you're right, Anthony, we've had some similar experiences, and Mars has a great internal training program around leadership, starting from that very first job where you become a manager of other people. There's a whole kind of internal curriculum, and it's very well done. But I will say a couple of factors. I have made a lot of mistakes, as you said, along the way, and the thing about Mars is you have space to make mistakes. I mean, you can't repeat the same mistake over and over and over again.
Mm.
That's not cool, but you do have that space, and I think that's an important part. So there's that kind of formalized internal curriculum. There's the space to make it, and then maybe a topic we've touched on in many of our podcasts with medical leaders is there's mentorship within Mars. And for me, some of the best mentorship is I've had opportunities to work with other veterinarians along the way who've really sort of brought me up kind of on that side. But you can, if you want, have the opportunity to be mentored by people maybe from a more commercial background, or some other area of expertise that is not yours, that you can learn with as well. And that's brought, I think, a lot of learning for me, and that just things I don't know, things about business, things about supply chain, things about finance, getting the opportunity to, when you're talking with a finance person who's mentoring you, they're going to approach it kind of from what they know. And have you thought about this or this? And the answer is almost always no. I haven't thought about any of those things. But that sort of broadens your thinking. And I think that's something I feel like Mars does very well, is if, as a veterinarian, if you want to go and learn sort of outside your sphere of veterinary medicine, you can. You don't have to if you don't want to, but you can, and you can take a more broad career path. So that's I guess that's what I would say about my experience here.
Yeah, and I would say check to all of those. And then, a couple of the things that I would add, I think it's also been really valuable, the investment that Mars has made in my self understanding and the role that that plays in me being a leader, whether it's through 360 interviews where I have a chance to get that feedback from people around me, whether it's through, various coaching programs that have been made accessible. That opportunity for personal growth for me has been a really important factor, I think, in my ability to lead. And then the other piece I would add would be, as Brent said, kind of the informality has been really valuable. This culture of, you can reach out to just about anybody within Mars and ask them for 30 minutes to just, learn from them or to ask them some questions. And people will make that time for you, prioritize that time. And so that it is a culture of encouraging self-development, encouraging that, what's next for you, what do you want to learn, and how do we make those resources available for you. So that's been something I've taken advantage of. I'm curious and I like to think
Mm.
about, what can I learn next, and so it's been a culture that's really been useful for me.
Hmm. I really enjoyed this year reading Net Positive by Paul Polman, who's the ex CEO of Unilever, and he spoke very positively about Mars as a net positive company. Obviously, a lot on environment, but also, supply chain, who you're buying from, that's ethical and so on. So it's been really interesting to kind of learn a bit behind the scenes as well, and just that sustainability within a generation, which is and backed up, because it's very easy to say the words. And I look through a lot of reports and there's a lot of words out there, but I think we're a bit poorer at actually acting. I'm not including
Mhm.
Mars in that because you've made some really big commitments. So obviously my bag is kind of environmental sustainability, but they're all actually connected holistically. Obviously, as a really important person within the business, looking at the vets and the vet techs and the nurses and all the people that work in Mars Veterinary Health, how do you see veterinary sustainability going, in the sense of keeping people within the profession? We have a problem with that. Culturally, you're in 20 countries. Are there lessons that you can teach us, as individual practices as well as maybe small groups? You've got that 3,000 veterinary hospitals. There must be a lot of stuff that you've picked up on. How do you keep people within the profession? That role, which you said before about I think it was 12 people in the room and two of them are vets. It's so important to have that veterinary focus, isn't it, as well? So can you speak into that? And Brent, please sort of join in. I always notice when I'm looking at resumes, Royal Canin people stick around for quite a long time, don't they? So I don't think retention is a big
The
issue.
same old.
Correct me if I'm wrong in that. So yeah, I don't know if Molly, you want to lead on that, around that whole area of veterinary sustainability with workforce.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe what I'll start by saying is, having been one of those Royal Canin people who did move to another Mars business, but one of the pieces of continuity that I think is so important when we talk about the topic of sustainability is this fact that the Mars family, Mars is a family-owned company, and the family is really engaged and really involved in setting the plan, and their stated goal is to be here for generations to come. And I think, you kind of mentioned it. I mean, it's easy to have a tagline. It's easy to say something like that. But I will tell you that in every single interaction that I've had with a family member over the 16 years that I've been in the company, real authentic desire to do what's right for the long run
Mm.
comes through in every single conversation. And so, I feel very fortunate to be able to step back and say, what are the long-term investments that we need to make? Because creating a sustainable career for somebody is not something you do by turning a button, pushing a button or flipping a switch or making some short-term change. It really is about how we influence the culture, the ways of working, the career paths. And so, therein I've laid out some of the things that, that we've identified as opportunities. And in terms of the global component of our business, I would say In general, we as veterinary professionals have more in common than we do differences. There's certainly, variations in our cost of education, variations in how we're compensated, or what our work looks like day to day. But from the standpoint of who we are and what we're seeking from our career, I think it's, again, more common than it is different. And so, in looking across our hospitals and thinking about what we can do to support the sustainability of our people, I think number one, I want to go to culture and recognizing, we all want to work somewhere where we feel psychologically safe, where we feel like we belong, where we feel like we are, there with a group of people with an aligned purpose. And it's not easy, or might I say, it's not impossible to, excuse me, it's not possible to drive culture in 3,000 hospitals, in terms of, obviously, culture is about the people who are there and the environment that they're in. But I think what we can do is be very clear and explicit about our expectations of our leaders and how we support and educate them so that they can deliver those expectations, the things that we measure, that we say are important. So, as just a couple of examples there, we measure or we track patient safety events. So we ask our teams to voluntarily, they don't have to, but to raise their hands and enter into a system when something adverse has happened to a patient or there was a near miss, so that we can feel like we're a learning culture, that we accept that mistakes happen. Medicine is not, it's humans. It's not machines. And then we can learn from it and we can be better. And so driving that culture of psychological safety, that's just a piece of psychological safety, I should say, but a really important one, a really important artifact to show people that we care and we want you to speak up. So that idea of creating a safe environment that's safe for our patients, for our clients, but very much so for our associates is number one and a huge priority on my team, as well as throughout the entire business. I think the second one, I mentioned our expectations for our leaders. We know that when we talk to doctors, the number one reason most people leave a job is because of a challenge with their manager. People leave people, they don't leave jobs. And so, and as veterinarians, we're not necessarily like communication skills, like financial skills, we're not necessarily trained to be leaders in veterinary school. And so our various businesses have various programs to help develop that first time leader. And as Brent said, Mars has some of those programs. And so it was really exciting just a few weeks ago to come together across our businesses and say, this is a place we really need to align. Again, how can we're more similar than different? So how can we work together to bring our programs together and create something even more impactful and powerful for those first time veterinary professionals, technicians, nurses, or doctors stepping into those leadership roles? So those are both really important. And then I think also just looking at the future of work and what is today's generation looking for from our profession and what are future generations looking for. And we hear, they're looking for flexibility. And that's not just flexibility in hours, that's flexibility in the roles that they play, the jobs that they do. They're looking for career progression. So I'll say this is something we're still in the process of exploring, being curious about, learning about what the desires are. But we recognize that generally, veterinarians in the world today, people don't want to necessarily work an 8 to 5 job Monday through Friday or to work every weekend. So, how can we create a work schedule that fits people, but even more importantly, the environment that gives them the flexibility to, one day see preventive care cases and the next day go work in an emergency room, or to be an educator one day and then go work in the specialty environment another day. And so we're working to develop that career flexibility, both in the moment as well over time. So you're an associate veterinarian for 3 years. What do you want to do next? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a student coach? Let's make those opportunities are there today. We now need to formalize them. And that's what we're in the process of doing, so that we can offer that very diverse career that I think for most people brings them a little bit more energy. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about when we think about the sustainability. And of course, it's a big topic. There's a lot of areas to cover.
I've talked to quite a few vets on the podcast, young vets, 5 to 10 years qualified. And it seems as if we can get the beginning bit right, if we can get them through the first 4 or 5 years, the majority, the people I've spoken to say, yeah, it was a bit tough the first few years. It's a steep learning curve, isn't it, when you leave university? But if we get them over that hump, actually a lot of the job is quite easy. And then there's 20% that's more challenging, and that's exciting in its own way as well. So that time spent in the early stages with training, I think, is so critical, isn't it?
I agree. I agree. I think that yes, as you say, and I think there's also a second window that we've identified around 6 to 7 years, which is
Yeah.
very similar to my own career. Of that, is this what I want to keep doing, or do I want to
Mm.
explore some of my other options? And so, how do we offer people an opportunity to explore a specialty at that point in time without having to take a pay cut? How do we offer them a certificate program so that they can
Yeah.
become develop their expertise in a certain area? So I think we know a lot of the pain points. We don't know all of them. We have to keep learning, but that's exciting because now we can do something about it. And to have the opportunity to do that at a global scale, to me is it's a lot of responsibility, but it's a lot of inspiration as well.
As you both have said, sustainability has a lot of different facets. And I mean, we've talked about a couple of them. One I'd be interested in hearing more of your thoughts on, Molly, with some of the great work that you're doing in MVH is around the pharmaceutical stewardship element.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of those places where it's so powerful to be able to stop for a minute, step back, and think about impact at scale, and really to think about impact on the future. So several years ago, so across our, let me step back and say, within Mars Vet Health, we have different businesses. Some of them are acquisition models. Some of them have built practices from the ground up, and so we're in various stages of being able to do things in a more harmonized way, to do things in a more aligned way. But one of our practices that has been I'd say is at one end of the spectrum is our Banfield practice, which are hospitals that have been built from the ground up. So you're able to kind of establish the culture. There's a lot of commonalities. There's more standardization within a Banfield hospital. So I say all of that because when we started to look at antimicrobial resistance and responsible pharmaceutical stewardship, the Banfield model was a great place for us to start because we have great data in those hospitals. We have the same practice management system. The data is shared, and so we're able to look at what's happening across 1,000 veterinary hospitals, with in one fell swoop. I mean, the data scientists would tell me it's not that easy, but it's certainly far easier than having to grab it out of different hospitals or ask for voluntary reporting. So we started looking in the Banfield hospitals at just how antibiotics were being prescribed and bringing that information together and then just delivering it back out to our doctors to let them know what was happening. And we weren't trying to point fingers, we weren't trying to place blame. We just wanted to be aware of what we were doing so that we could identify places where we could get better. So just bringing that information to the forefront of our doctors was incredibly powerful. And then we were able to set some goals in certain areas. When we've got that cat with lower urinary tract disease, what do we really want to be doing, and what do we think should be the right use of antibiotics in that situation, and also identify some of the barriers. So we know that culture and sensitivity was a cost barrier for many clients. So how can we look at making some adjustments so that doing the right thing is an easier step for our doctors and clients than something that's such a hard lift? So we did some really great work to start at Banfield, and then I think it was just last year we published one of the first papers, which was looking at that antibiotic use, antimicrobial use across a broader swath of our hospitals. So it's just starting to work down the path of, if we don't know what we're doing today, it's going to be really hard to improve upon it. So let's start with those measures. And now we're in a place where, because we have the ability to track that usage across our hospitals, we can now set some goals. We can educate as to the how to be more responsible or more judicious in our use of certain pharmaceuticals. And it's a fantastic time for us coming together and actually starting to identify areas where it's very important that we align across our practices to make a difference in our clinics and in the communities that we're serving and in the planet that we all exist on. And so this is a place where we have a lot of excitement bringing programs together for everything from hand hygiene to what drugs we're actually ordering into our hospitals, to how we're using them and how we're following up on that usage. So more to come, Brent. I'll be happy to keep you in the loop about it. But I think we have this responsibility, the scale that we operate at. If Mars isn't out there doing this work and sharing this work, how can we expect an individual practice to come to the table? And so I really value the opportunity we have to do some good work, do some research, publish that, or share it in white papers, or share it at conferences, and then really help to bring the whole profession along. So I'm excited about our future there.
Excellent.
I was really excited, Molly. A couple of years ago, we did a pharmaceutical stewardship webinar with Ian Battersby and Ellie West as part of our virtual Congress, our sustainability summit. And I think, that piece of sharing that information, of not holding it, and it's only for Mars practices, is massively important. Obviously, we're talking about antibiotics there, but we talked a lot about the fantastic work that you're doing around anesthetic gases, which we know are huge greenhouse gases if they get into the atmosphere. And then seeing the work that you're doing with Sage Tech as well, in potentially, actually capturing those anesthetic gases, and then maybe even getting really circular and recycling them is super exciting. And I know you're leading on that, for the profession at large. And it's then having people coming afterwards, who can also use it from other groups and individual practices. So maybe a great place to finish. Thank you so much for the work that you're not only just doing, for Mars, but this is bigger. It's also for the profession, but also these topics we're talking about are very much One Health. And I think sustainability is something that we have to be prepared to share. It shouldn't be competitive. It should be collaborative. And thanks for taking the lead and not only saying that, but actually doing it as well.
Thank you. It is such a responsibility, and there's no time like the present to start, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today.
Yeah. Molly, I know how busy you are. Also, Brent, for actually making this series possible, but also giving you time. So appreciate it. And, thanks very much for coming on and joining the chat.
Thank you so much, Anthony and Brent. It's wonderful to have some time with you.
You all as well.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. See you hopefully on a podcast or a webinar very soon. Take care and have a great day.